Welcome everyone to the Eugene City Council work session for February 11th. Welcome to everyone here and at home. I'm going to change the order of the agenda a little bit, and we're just going to start out with the work session, and if we have time at the end, we'll do the committee report. So we want to be sure we have enough time for the discussion of the major item of our work session, which is the local option levy for city services. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'll go through a little presentation here to get the conversation started. And just as a reminder, if the council chooses to put anything out on the May ballot, then Wednesday we'll need final decisions, and what that really means is you would have to approve a ballot resolution at that point to send something out. So that's the timing for us. But the direction that you the direction that you had provided to us previously was to prepare two options, initially one for a $3 million levy and one for a $6 million levy, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. And then also at the Budget Committee meeting, you asked us to include an option for a city fee, and so we will be talking about all three of those this evening. I just want to do a broad outline, and then we'll talk about each of these. This is from our FY14 plan of action, just to kind of set this up for you. Across the top, we talk about a full levy or fee, not a partial levy. So that full levy or fee is really the that first and third pieces from the last slide, and then there's a partial levy. And then if there's no new revenue, so that's always an option, is to not pursue anything. What we've talked about is part of our action plan that we will continue to try to find, and we'll continue to find efficiencies and cost reductions to close the gap. And so this isn't setting all of the gap out for potentially new revenue, and we are estimating that we will be able to find efficiencies and cost reductions of plus or minus right around $1 million. So regardless of any of those any of the options that you choose to pursue, we would still look for $1 million worth of efficiencies and cost reductions. And then ongoing services to close the gap is $5 million, and we've talked about that. The $6 million gap, which is 5 plus 1, but we would also bring back in there's one-time expenses as part of the fire company, and so that would also become or turn into an ongoing expense. And so the total for the full levy or fee is really 5.3, not 6. And the reason for that is we are continuing to find efficiencies and cost reductions as part of that. So I just want to make sure everybody understands that. But when you go all the way down through, the total budget actions is closing the gap at $6 million plus that 0.3 that is a part of those one-time expenses currently for the fire company that would be turned into ongoing expenses. And so if the full levy or fee is approved by the voters, then there is no remaining gap that has to occur. We've taken care of it with efficiencies, cost reductions, and then new revenue. With a partial levy, that is, you can see they're set at $3 million. That's more specifically about what you asked us to bring back. And the logic's the same. We'd still find $1 million. There's the 0.3 for the fire company and then another 2.7, and so you can look through that. The remaining gap would say that if the voters approved that, we would be closing $4 million of the gap. There'd still be another $2+ million that would be found through the regular budget process. And of course, if no new revenue, if that's where you choose to go, we will still find that $1 million worth of efficiencies, and then through the budget process, there'd be another $5 million that would have to be looked at as part of the budget process. I just want to remind all of us is where we have been for the last 4 years. Our goal really is to balance the services and the vision and the goals that the council has set out for us over the last many years. And so we're trying to continually provide a portfolio of services that really makes Eugene a great place to live by balancing our safe community, sustainable development, and accessible and thriving recreation and cultural opportunities. And so that's what we're continually trying to do as we've been presenting budgets over the last 4 years. And really, as even we're in this conversation, as we've looked at the kinds of things that would be a part of a fee or levy that would go out to the voters. We're still trying to provide some sense of balance among all of these. What we talked about really several months ago is my intent to prepare 2 budgets, and so we're still planning on doing that. The first budget would assume no new revenue, and that's either because you've chosen not to send something out to the voters or that the voters have said no to a new revenue measure, and so that budget will be prepared, and I'll show you the kinds of things that actually would be included or not included in that. And then another budget would assume that new revenue has been obtained, and again, there will still be that $1 million of efficiencies and cost reductions in either one of those scenarios, and then it's just a matter of how the remaining gap is closed. And so we are preparing that proposed budget. The actual proposed budget will be released prior to a vote, because that's when we necessarily do that, and that's when we just generally release our budgets. And so there will be 2 budgets that will be released. And so this is just the services and the items that, from our perspective, that if you choose to move forward with a new revenue option for the voters, and they choose to pass that, then these are the items that total that $5.3 million from that second slide. So what that would say is we'd be maintaining the fire company at Station 2, we'd be maintaining Cahoot vehicle, we'd be maintaining 4 investigators in the police department, maintaining the teen court program as we go, and on the human services and homelessness, discretionary funding from a general fund, Looking Glass, and then there's a series of quality of life items: downtown library for the day, the branch library, Sheldon Pool, the equity, human rights, neighborhood sustainability, neighborhood parks, restrooms, and some parks maintenance. On the flip side is if there's no new revenue, either because you choose to not put something out or the voters say no, then my proposed budget will not include these items, and those will be totaling $5.3 million. So that's the list for that. We also, you asked us to provide a partial, and this is on the left side, represents $3 million worth of items. And so if we were to go out with the $3 million worth of a revenue measure, the items on the left are the things that would or would not be in my proposed budget, depending on the outcome of that election. And then the items on the right, which make up the rest of that $5.3 million, would not be a part of my recommended FY14 budget. So this is what represents, from our perspective, the items that would be in the $3 million and would not be in the We've gone through some of this before, but this is kind of an update on the levy options themselves. And the full levy, again, the services is $5.3 million, not 6, $5.3 million, and that does close the gap. There is inflation through FY18 that we would want to account for. The presumption would be is that if we're funding them this year, we'd want to fund them next year and for all 5 years, and so we do need to account for that. There is a contingency, a very small contingency in there, and then also there are anticipated delinquencies that we know about. There's also discounts that people can apply for and receive, and so that needs to be accounted for if we do want to provide the $5.3 million worth of services. And so the total levy for the 5 years, you can see that at 31.5. The partial levy is at 18. You kind of go through the math, and the estimated annual cost to a median home in a full levy is about $87 per year, and on the partial levy it's $51 per year. And the average median home is $173,000. On the city service fee piece, these are items that relate to that fee. It would be set by City Council at the time of the budget, not only in FY14, but every year. so the city manager would not be setting this particular fee. It would be capped at $10 per month for residential, $20 per month for non-residential. What we're trying to do is also provide a tiering system in this, because we have heard through this entire conversation that social equity and providing some sort of equity is important. We know this doesn't make it a truly progressive fee or tax, but we're also trying to respond to that. The increase above a cap would require a public vote. So it wouldn't be one in which the council can just automatically move beyond $10. It would be capped at 10. It would apply to all dwellings and businesses. We would also have a low-income assistance program that the council would establish as a part of setting that fee. And of course, we'd look to administer it in a cost-efficient and a cost-effective manner. With both a levy and a fee, there are some other things that we've talked about. There would be restrictions on spending, and so you can only spend it for certain kinds of things. It's not open to spend it on any item that we would choose. There would be a cap on the amount. For the fee, it's $10. The levy, there's a specific dollar amount that would be the cap. In both cases, we would recommend an oversight committee, similar to we have with our bond issue for the streets bond, in which their job would be is to actually review to ensure that what we said we would spend the money on is actually what we're spending it on, and then they would provide an annual report to me back up to the council. In both cases, we would recommend a 5-year review by the council. For the levy, it would expire in 5 years, and so that would necessarily mean the council can choose to do something at that point. On the fee, what we would recommend is that it not sunset, but the council actually have a review period to decide whether or not it should continue to go forward, terminate it, or make any other adjustments to that fee. And then, again, a public vote to increase the levy. You would do that through a new levy, or if you want to move the fee beyond the $10 cap, that would also be a public vote involved with that. And so really we have the options. One is a local option levy to fully close the budget gap, and so that for us is the full fee, or a full levy. The second one is that partial levy that we talked about at $3 million, although you could set it at anything you would choose to do that. The city service fee, which is to fully close the budget gap, which is our recommendation, or you can take no action, and then we'll just work through the budget process itself. And I know Glenn has passed out 3 different motions that relate to these particularly. And so with that, we're available for questions.
What I think I'll do is I'll just start around the table and get people's one round of responses, and we'll go from there. So, Councilor Foley?
Okay, I do have a question. In the AIS, on attachment A, you had a list of ongoing services. We're not looking at that list at all anymore, is that correct?
Let me make sure. From that list, what we have done is we've said, here's this list, and the $5.3 million comes off of this list. And so that's where that is this entire list. What we're trying to do is be very specific and not have it sort of generic, and so people know specifically what they are or not would be investing in.
Okay, so some of the items that are on that list that don't show up in your slides, are they automatically back in to be funded, or are they subject to your further review or the budget committee say discontinuing funding for some of these services?
Ultimately, it's the budget committee, but for example, there are some that I would anticipate having in my recommended budget, regardless of whether or not something goes out to the voters or it's approved by the voters. A couple of examples of that is jail beds. I would anticipate that being in my budget regardless of this whole conversation. Another one of those is Echo Hollow Pool. Echo Hollow Pool, one, it's the use for that. The two, from just purely an accessibility standpoint, we think that that's a critical piece. So there are some of those items. There are a couple of items that we have taken off the list that in and of themselves would not necessarily be in the budget or not. They would be compete in the budget process. A good example of that would be council travel, Sister Cities would be an example of that. Lane Metro Partnership would be an example of that. So those would not necessarily be a part, they wouldn't be a part of my budget necessarily.
So, okay, and another question, even if either a levy or fee passes by the voters, you know, $500,000, where to go for the library, closing it one day a week, how much is that, would that save in a year's time?
If we closed the library for one day a week, it would save $500,000.
So $500,000.
Correct.
Okay.
And
That is not on there. If the levy or if the service fee passes, the library will remain open 7 days a week?
correct. If it's a full levy, not a partial, if it's a full levy or fee, the downtown library would be open 7 days a week. That's correct.
Okay. All right. You know, I'm more inclined to put out a motion, and I know this is just the first round. I'm just voicing my own opinion here. I'd be more inclined to put out the motion for a full levy motion as opposed to the full service fee motion.
Okay. George?
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks for the presentation. I like these changes. I think the only way to go really is a fee. The reason is, if we go with a levy, there'll be too many places that won't be captured. Any nonprofit, the University of Oregon, will not have to pay any money. I think a lot of the nonprofits, as strapped as many of them are, including the University of Oregon, I think that they still need to share the responsibility for all the benefits that the city gets out of all these measures, that the funding will continue. I think a fee structure with graduated in a fairly simple and easy to understand manner is the only fair way to go. I would like to. I'm just saying. I think if anyone would be forgiven from this fee structure, I think it should be 4J and Bethel school districts, or perhaps they would be in the lower category of payment, because I'm imagining you have to add up all the number of facilities, and that would be a billable address, and so it's, say, 30 times $10 a month. You know, that adds up for the school districts. They're going to maybe have their own bond measures out there. So, but I think a fee really makes the best sense, and that's the one I'm going to support. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I'm in favor of either, at this point, and I haven't quite made my mind up yet, of, again, putting this before the voters, either the full levy or the city service fee. I'm still going over some numbers in my head that I was working through this weekend, and I appreciate the amendments that the city manager's made to the recommendations. That helps me a lot. One of the things I'm most concerned about is balancing our reduction in human service, because I'm looking at Station 7 on here and a couple of the other things that look like they're going to be severely impacted by any reduction that we have, and we're already at bare bottom in this community, whether it be the city or the county, with human services. And I like to point out that human services and public safety have a very symbiotic relationship, and I think that we need to continue to support that where we can, and keeping young people out of the criminal justice system as much as we can. So but I think the people need to have the opportunity to decide for themselves what their budget can stand.
Thank you. I favor the 5-year levy and for the full amount. And I like that it ends in 5 years. I don't think we've adequately discussed other possible ways to raise money. I think an income tax surcharge, for example. But that gives us time gives us time to think of other things and to do a thorough discussion of other possible ways to raise money. Also, I think people, if they know it's going to end in 5 years, they'll be reassured that it's not going to, it's easier to vote for that than something that lasts forever, and we know a fee lasts forever. And also, we would have more incentive to try to find other ways. I don't think either one is totally fair. I think the levy is more nearly fair. Someone who owns expensive property is most likely able to pay more than someone who owns a 3-room house, for example. And I just think that's the best we can do right now. But I hope that we will look at ways to put something on income tax, which is still not fair, but the most nearly fair tax, and find a way to tax people who work in Eugene and use our facilities, our roads, our parks, and don't pay anything now. I am disturbed that you put restrooms there. I think regardless of what park restrooms need to be open, there are people living in some of our parks, I know, and it's not only for their comfort, but for the comfort of everyone else who uses the parks that we need the restrooms open. It's a matter of sanitation, decency, all sorts of things, and I think that comes right up there with fire as a necessity. But I strongly favor of these things that we have right now, in favor of the full levy. Thank you.
Alan?
A couple of questions. Can we have the slides back up there? On slide 6, the list of things that would be on there, the equity, human rights, neighborhood, and sustainability, that's not the entire programs, that's just part of the programs?
Correct. This is the slide you're looking at for the full levy or
Yeah.
fee.
Down there and over the right, third from the bottom.
Correct. So what I mentioned is that we've left a portion of, and this will get, Greg, a little bit your question too about the human services, that I would anticipate putting into my budget, regardless of whether or not what goes forward here, would be a couple things. I mentioned jails. I mentioned Echo Hollow Pool. There'd be a much smaller piece of human services discretionary funding that would stay in there for $275,000 or something, plus or minus around there. We would maintain a portion to keep our equity, human rights, our neighborhoods and sustainability program at a minimal programming, partly because we've done human rights and neighborhoods and sustainability as a way of doing business for a long time in this community, and so part of it is maintaining that part of the integrity. There would be a small piece of recreation that is really related to a couple of our after-school programs that are really about accessibility and a social equity component. And so we're trying to balance all of that, again, back against all of your goals, and so as we think about that. So the answer is yes, there would be a portion for those programs that would maintain the programs at a much reduced place where they are, but there would still be something in those programs. That's correct.
Same is true for parks maintenance and human services funding.
Human services funding, parks maintenance, not so much. That is, the 510 is there on that.
But that's only a portion of the
total parks maintenance. Yes, that's
maintenance. It's
that's
not like
correct.
I think parks maintenance goes away.
Right, that's correct. Remember, we're still trying to maintain some semblance of different services as opposed to just completely cutting them off across the board. And so that's still a part of our thought process as we've gone down through this.
So we'd still have park maintenance, and we'd still have human services funding, but part of them would be funded through this mechanism.
Right. Significant impact, but yes, there would still be some.
On slide 8, at the bottom, it's always in the fine print, right? Fine print says $5.3 million levy is $6.3 million. What's the difference?
Well, if you go down in that first column,
For the fee.
right, well, so you can talk about some more detail, but there's the inflation accounts for a portion of that, 2.8 million of that. So if we're still wanting to do $5.3 million worth of services in today's dollars are cheaper than in the future, so you have to account for inflation, a little contingency, and then the 1.9 is there will be some delinquent payments or non-payments. There's also some discounts that people can take, and so if to maintain $5.3 million, you still have to levy at 6.3.
So 31.5 divided by 5.
Right.
Right, and the way the levy would work is we levy that same amount each year for 5 years, the 6.3 million.
What about the fee?
The fee, we would have to raise more than $5.3 million because we would have to collect the fee, bill and collect the fee, and we would also include some sort of low-income assistance program, which hasn't yet been defined. So we would have to raise more than $5.3 million in order to do that. And then also the same thing with inflation over.
So you would set that as part of the budget
Right.
process?
Right.
Because we would know all those factors for sure.
But the fee would be a $10
More.
fee
The fee would be capped at $10, so it won't go any,
up to,
could be up to
or
$10.
residential. Okay.
Yes.
The other question I had was on slide 9, which is the second bullet there, the modest fee cap, $10 for residential and $20 for non-residential. So that's $87 approximately for residential and $174,000 for non-residential. I was thinking that would be a wider gap than that. That the non-residential would be multiples of 10 as opposed to just one multiple, for instance. So if it were 3 multiples, it would be 261 instead of 87. And I think businesses can handle that a lot better than a single residence.
I'm not sure when you say 87 and 261, I'm not sure where that's on this particular slide.
So $10 a month would be. Well,
This
that
is
would
for the
be-
fee.
Right.
Yeah, not
So
the,
that would be 120 versus 240 versus 360.
right, and so on the levy, with the property tax, it's already graduated based on property value, obviously, so we wouldn't anticipate building in another
Right. You wouldn't have to
tier
do
on that.
Right. So we could adjust that 20 to make it say 30 or something like that. And then
Correct.
And then how much detail do we have on the low-income assistance?
What it would say is prior to implementing a fee, you would have to create that, and so we would anticipate that being a part of, ultimately as part of the budget process, you're setting the fee to account for whatever low-income assistance program you choose to put into place. And so you have to define it before you can collect a fee. The definition of that is the council would have to create that and set the fee based on that.
And you're anticipating that we would do that before the election, May? So it becomes clear.
We sure can. I think we would follow your lead, but yes, you can do that.
One of the issues about actually setting what kind of low-income assistance program you have is going to be dependent on who's actually collecting it. So if it's eWeb that's collecting it, for ease of administration and cost efficiency, we would want to use a program that works with the way eWeb does things. If eWeb is not collecting it, you would have a greater flexibility in terms of how you create it. But again, the more complicated program you have, the more cost there's going to be to administering it.
Right. And I guess I've already said this, but one of my problems with the eWeb low-income assistance is that not everybody who might be eligible for this participates in that program, so that becomes a problem for me. I like a fee, maybe with some modifications, but I like a fee. I think it's these are funding ongoing services, so having it be on a 5-year levy term doesn't make much sense to me. I like that we can come back and look at it at 5 years and say, do we still need this? If we can modify it, we can change it, we can lower it, we can get rid of it. But I think that the fact that they're ongoing services that we're funding with this requires an ongoing mechanism. I also, when a couple of people brought up the, just next round.
Okay. Claire?
Thank you, Mayor. So I too am leaning more towards supporting the fee rather than the levy because of and I agree with Councilor Taylor, neither is perfectly fair, but in this instance, I think capturing those folks who would not pay anything if we did the property tax levy, I think is important in terms of people feeling that everyone is contributing, at least everyone who's residing within the city. It's not a perfect mechanism, but I think if we build in these pieces that it's very specific in terms of what it's going to fund, and we are kept to that, we have the citizen oversight piece, and we have the opportunity to revisit. I agree that we need to be looking for other revenues and looking at our tax exemptions that we're giving out as well as ways to close some of that gap over the next 5 years. I agree with Councilor Zelenka, too, about the funding ongoing services with a levy. We really need to put something in place that we can then revisit it in that context and pull back from if we're seeing that property values are coming back online, we're digging out of this recession, particularly since we'll have specific things that this is attached to, so we'll be able to look at it in that scope, that it's not just a free-for-all general fund coming in. It does give me a lot of heartburn to see that much of human services funding put into that one possible funding source, but I recognize that we are in tight times and we need to be making difficult decisions. I have a lot of heartburn about the idea of closing the downtown library 1 day a week, but I might be open to considering that if it meant saving some of our human services funding as a exchange, although it would not make me happy. So I'm still struggling with some of those things, but right now I'm leaning in support of a city fee.
Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. Like Betty, I don't believe that this body's done enough yet in the way of conversations about other more creative options, and I believe that that applies to both sides of the the equation, both with regard to new revenues, as I've mentioned before, but also with regard to what should be or might be cut. Along those lines, I was wondering if I could get a memo from staff, please, on the current market value assessed by staff of Laurelwood Golf Course, of the real estate that accompanies it that's undeveloped, and the amount of money that we both paid in service agreement last year and how much we subsidized for losses. The concern I have is this. I sense a little more support today than in previous time for the fee, but I believe that we have at least support for a levy. I believe that levy will fail. I believe if we pass a fee, we at least risk that will be referred to a ballot and will not pass, and we'll be in the same position again that we are right now. Fortunately, we have 2 months before the manager proposes his budget and 3 months before we have to make final decisions at Budget Committee on some of this. I would suggest that we consider some of the valuable lessons of the past. After the passage of Measure 5 and 50, so forth, a couple of decades ago, we went through a process called Eugene Decisions, where a number of very difficult decisions were made about what needed to be cut in the city budget. I would say we should consider a similar sort of process where we involve more of our community rather than make some very limited decisions about what to cut here. I think we should hear from a broader sector of our community before making those decisions, and fortunately we have time to do that. And I'd also like to say that I think there are programs and assets that are less critical than what we've put on the table so far, and opportunities for bridge funding to get us to a place where we can find sustainable funding that doesn't include the option of creating new fees or new taxes. Thank you.
Chris?
Thank you. So just as a point of clarification, I thought what I was hearing was you don't support either one?
That's correct.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure. I'm like Greg. I could see the advantages and disadvantages of either one. I mean, they both have features and they both have challenges. I mean, I get that. And so I could go either way. I mean, I would probably prefer the fee, simply because of all the stability reasons that it has going for it. But I also would be concerned that it's more complicated. People might not understand it when you're dealing with elections. That's always a challenge. I mean, I think in many times in elections you start at no and then you have to convince people to get to yes. And if you have a complicated thing, it's hard to get people to yes, particularly if they have a lot of questions, which this could raise. So I think of it in terms of what I like, what does the job, but also what has the greatest possibility of passing. So I could go either way, and I want to hear more conversation, and I especially want to hear what we hear in the session that we'll have at 7:30. So I am very aware, though, that we need to make some sort of a decision by Wednesday if we want to go on the ballot. So we don't have the luxury of a lot of the deliberation that I might otherwise like to have. There's a lot of conversation around what goes in it, what kind of items we want to talk about, rates. There's a whole lot of things I would love to talk about, but I'm feeling this enormous pressure to make a decision so that if we do want to go in May, we do have to make that decision right away. So the list you've brought us, at least initially, is one that I can go with. Not that I want to go with, but I can go with. I don't want to cut a single one of these things, and I realize it's the big risk. And like Alan, I'm very concerned that if we propose, a lot of this stuff on here and it doesn't pass, I don't want to have to cut any of that stuff. But we have to be prepared to cut it if we want to maintain our credibility. I'm intrigued by the idea of looking at other options, but I don't know if we have the time to be able to do that. I think we can have those conversations as part of the budget discussion, but we still have to make a decision about whether or not to go for an election this May. And I can't, in all conscience, say, let's not go with an election in May, let's have a discussion and come up with something. As much as I appreciate what you're trying to do, and I do want to have that conversation, I just am too nervous to not put something on the ballot and let the voters decide what they're going to go. So I could go either way. I'm trying to gauge where my colleagues are around the table, and I see a lot of different opinions. I see split. Some are going one way, some are going the other. I think that's fine. And I think we've got today and Wednesday to make the final decision for you, but I think it will be one that was based on a lot of good conversation.
City Manager, just to clarify, in order for you to bring something back to us on Wednesday, you need direction tonight.
Tonight? Okay. Thanks for the clarification. I appreciate that.
Glenn,
That was the point I wanted to make. We can't create this stuff for you on Wednesday.
Yeah, no, we need it tonight. I get that. Okay.
So round two, I've got George Brown and Alan Zelenka. George?
Thank you, Mayor. Well, really, I think the only thing that makes sense is the fee. For a reason I already stated, we'll capture more people that will be, that use the services, that need all the things that might go away if we don't find the funding. And that was just an idea I came up with myself, comparing, the benefits of the fee and the levy. And the demerits. I mean, the demerits are obvious, but the good things about one or the other, and I came to the conclusion that the fee is the only way to go. But I think what may help some of us who haven't made our minds up, if we go back to the Manross poll, and I think most of us, I certainly do, I respect the Strategy Research Institute and Mr. Manross. I think he does a fabulous job. He's been very accurate in the past, and I have no reason to think that the results that he got will not prove to be true. Voters clearly said they preferred a fee over a levy. The voters, the likely voters that were polled, overwhelmingly said, what was it? It was 61% to 29 or something, a fee versus a levy. The voters have already told us that. A very good sampling of the voters. And they said, furthermore, what was it, 68% or 65, 66% said they would approve a fee, as long as I got to vote on it. So I really think the fee is the only way to go here. The voters have already told us what they want us to do. And so I think we really make a big mistake if we choose the levy. They've told us they don't like the levy. And I think that if we choose the levy, it will fail. I think the fee has an outstanding chance of success, as long as we articulate our position in an open and transparent way to the voters. And the opponents will do the same thing. They will present their positions, and then the voters will be able to choose whether they want to keep these services or see drastic reductions if they don't get cut out entirely. And so they've told us they would support a fee structure, and to choose the levy, I think, would just be kind of suicidal, really. Thank you.
Alan?
Yeah, I'm in favor of putting this on the ballot because I agree with Councilor Pryor that looking at the service list, it's ugly, and I think it impacts our ability to do things in the city and preserve our quality of life, but also provide public safety and other amenities that we want and think that we should have in a city. So I understand that $10 a month can be significant for people on fixed income and low incomes, but so I think it's up to us to put it out there for people to choose. In response to Councilor Clark's request for the assessment for the value of selling a park, I think we should, if we're going to look at, I don't want to just look at one park, I want to look at all the parks. Laurel Hill Golf Course isn't just, it's only a small part of it is actually the golf courses. There's a part, most of it's actually a park and open space. So I'm not in favor of selling any parks, but if we're going to look at selling assets, I want to look at all of them. So if we're going to do that analysis, I want to see the analysis for selling all of the parks in the city and figuring out which one we should get rid of if we're going to go down that path and selling assets. That's not the way I want to do it. Another thing that came up that I thought was interesting when in the debate about tax levy versus a fee, people said that the tax levy was deductible. And I thought, well, that's interesting. So I did a little research on it, but I thought most people don't actually do itemized deductions on their taxes. They take the standard deduction, so it wouldn't impact them at all. And I wanted to know what it was in Oregon, and so I went Googled it, and the Center for Federal Tax Policy, which is a 1937 independent nonprofit group in Washington, D.C., it's a think tank, and they did a state-by-state analysis of it a little while ago, but probably still valid, 2005, and they said 42% of Oregonians itemize taxes, so not even a majority. But then when you even break it down further, you looked at who itemizes taxes. People who have incomes of less than 50%, it's a little over 20% of them, so 1 in 5 itemize taxes. If you look at people over $100,000 income, it's 96%. So it's actually, the people who proposed that or thought it was a good idea, I just wanted to thank them for putting forth a tax giveaway to the rich. That's what it kind of boils down to, because most people don't take a tax deduction or a tax itemization. So I think that's the levy's the way to go. Do we also need to authorize an ordinance as part of that to set up the fee?
We would, and we'd bring that back to you on Wednesday if that's where you want to go with it.
Then it would just have all those points that are in that slide 9.
Glenn says we'd want to review it tonight, but I think
sure it's there. So we're kind of, Mayor, are we doing a 2-step process where we're doing pick one and then figure out how to implement it?
Betty, and then we'll have to take somebody's motion.
Thank you.
Make one.
People in my area who've been talking to me like the 5-year levy because it ends, so there's a chance to vote on it. Vote on it again, decide whether they want to vote on it again, whether they want to continue it or not. And I think people are very confused about the fee. They say, well, why would you do that? And I think it's more clear, this is more clear how it happens, and it is more nearly graduated than a fee is. There are people with mansions who would pay the same as somebody with a tiny house if we have a standard fee, and that is really unfair. Thank you.
George?
Well, yes, thank you, Mayor. I'd like to address that. I'm just wondering if there could be a clause in the fee measure that said it's for 5 years, or will be reviewed by council in 5 years.
There is.
Review is in there.
And the review is in there. Okay, well, see, here's my thought about this. Nobody really wants to do this, but we can't think of another way, another rational way to get the revenue that we need, that the tax receipts are declining every year, the gap grows bigger, so we've come up with this idea. It's my fond hope and desire that someday in the hopefully not too distant future, there will be a happy day when the recession ends, when widespread economic growth happens, and when property tax receipts exceed the city's expenses for, say, 2 or 3 years in a row. At that point, council, future council, hopefully some of us will be on that council. It won't be that far away. They will decide, you know, out of their own common sense and the wishes of their constituents to review the policy, and if it looks like we're actually kind of where we need to be, we'll get rid of the fee altogether. And if the council decides not to do that, the taxpayers, all they have to do is go out and get 5,000 valid signatures and refer, dissolution, a sunset of the fee to the ballot, and I'm sure it would pass overwhelmingly if we're in that financial condition. So this isn't a forever and ever thing. People say, well, you know, once they get a fee, it'll never go away. That's not true. It doesn't have to be permanent, and everybody has remedies to make sure that doesn't happen. So I don't think that argument's valid. I think we all agree that this is an emergency measure. We're in an emergency here. It's not a normal time. You know, we have to take extraordinary measures to preserve the town that we all want to live in. That's how I see this. And so, you know, it's not forever and ever. It's to get us through the emergency. I think most people realize that. I think most of the likely voters polled understood that. That's why they supported the idea of the fee. Thanks.
Going to put a motion?
Yes, I do. I move to direct the city manager to bring back for final approval the city service fee ballot measure that could be used to close the budget gap and fund fire and police service, homeless and basic human services, and core quality of life services such as libraries and swimming pools.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All right, all those in favor, please. Did you want to say something?
I sense that there are votes enough to pass this, if not this, the levy. And I've now heard again at the table a couple of pieces. I firmly believe that either will fail at the ballot. I certainly hope we don't lock ourselves. It would be completely, in my opinion, George, it would be irrational only for us to lock ourselves into saying that all these services must go away because there are no other options than this, when there clearly are.
Okay, I think we're ready to vote. All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In opposition, 3. It passes. Thank you. So next part of the conversation.
Do you want to go to an ordinance then?
So would you pass this around? So on Wednesday, what we will bring to you is a resolution calling the election and refers the ordinance that would actually create the fee. And so what I want to do now is just to walk you through the ordinance, and then if there are places that you want to do something differently, for example, have a different tier than a $10 per month and a $20 per month, if you would give us the now, then we can incorporate that into the ordinance, so that the ordinance will be attached as an exhibit to the resolution, and so you'll be referring the whole thing out to the voters, but it would be basically the ordinance that the voters would be approving. So if there are changes, it would be good to find those out now, so what we give you on Wednesday is the final product. And I'll just walk you... Okay, so the resolution that we will give you will talk more broadly about what you're trying to accomplish, closing the gap, the $5.3 million, more specificity about the services that you've heard the manager talk about in his presentation. So you'll see that in the proposed resolution, and we will get that out to you tomorrow. It may be late tomorrow, but we will get it out to you tomorrow so you have time to look at it before Wednesday at 12 o'clock. And then if there are questions or changes that you want, if you just contact me, we'll draft intended motions for you. So the first part of this, the purpose, just to provide a little background, the definitions more technical, the parts of the ordinance that really embed the points that the manager raised. If you turn to page 2, at the top of page 2 is the limitation on how the funds are going to be used to pay for police and fire, homeless and human services, quality of life services. In that subsection 2 is the first place you also see that the council can use a portion of the revenues to provide financial assistance to low-income individuals. Further down, it's actually a directive that you must do it, and I'll get to that in just a minute. Under the next section, 2.2015, subsection 1 provides that it's the council that shall set the amount of the fee. We talked the other evening about, when we were talking about the stormwater fee, talked about how the manager, after the council would initially set it, the manager would have the authority to adjust it. This is different. For this fee under this ordinance, it is only the council that can set the fee, and it's only the council that can adjust the fee. And you would do that by adopting a resolution, likely at the same time that you adopt the budget. You would know what the gap is and whether you need how big of a fee you would need. Subsection 3 under there, under 2.2015, states that the fee could not exceed $10 per residential unit, $20 per non-residential unit. And so if you wanted to change that and say there should be more of a difference, this would be the place that we would change that. You also see at the second sentence in subsection 3 that these maximums shall not be increased without approval by the voters. So whereas normally the council, if we had a cap in an ordinance, the council by ordinance could change that. This ordinance will say you can't do that without going back out to the voters. Subsection 4 deals with the low-income assistance program. And again, because we don't know how this will be administered yet, what we're trying to do is build in the flexibility for the council to state, once we have that information, just what kind of program you would like to create. This gives you the flexibility to either provide direct financial assistance, to provide an exemption, but it requires, before you first send out a bill for the fee, there must be this program in place. Our expectation is at the same time that you would adopt the fee, which would include the low-income assistance program. You could also do it before that if you chose. The next section, 2.2020, is basically deals with how the fee would be collected. And again, because we don't know that yet, this section provides the flexibility to either work with eWeb. If eWeb is willing to collect the fee, then the manager can contract with eWeb to do that. If eWeb is not interested in collecting the fee, then this gives the manager the authority to collect it in some other way. On page 3 are the review provisions, 2.2025. Subsection 1 says each year there will be that review committee providing a report to the manager and then to the council. And then subsection 2 provides that 5 years after the fee is in place, that the council shall conduct a review of the fee to determine whether the fee should be revised or terminated. And then the last section of this, which will be changed before you get it, just provides that. This will only take effect upon approval by the voters. Council will not actually adopt this ordinance, so that's why Section 3 will be changed. Instead, it will just be a referral to the voters and will become effective if and only if the voters approve it. If there are parts of the ordinance that you would like to have changed before you refer it to the voters, what we would appreciate is that the council by motion give that direction so that when we bring it to you on Wednesday, we have a high degree of confidence that it's actually what you will refer out rather than trying to make those changes on the fly on Wednesday.
George Brown, and then Greg Evans, and then Betty.
Thanks, Mayor. Well, from a first quick reading, I really like this. I think it's a really good, I think it's a very good document. And the only concern I have would be under 2.2015, number 4, about, the social equity portion. I think it's great. The only addition I would like to see some kind of adjustment made for 4J and Bethel school districts. I don't know if the other counselors think that's important or not, but 4J's will possibly.
And according to his suggestion, you would need to formulate a motion and put it out.
Okay. I haven't had enough time to think exactly how we would accommodate them and try to hold them as maybe not totally blameless.
Glenn,
but
maybe
no
I'll
harm.
help you.
I can help you. Let me say, before I give you a suggested motion, I understand this is the same ordinance. About 98% of it is the same ordinance that was posted on the website back in early January. I understand you may not have read it recently or maybe not at all. So when you have time, in the next 24 hours, if you see something that doesn't make sense, that you don't like, contact me tomorrow, and then if you need it, I can draft you an intended motion that you can then get out to the rest of the council. So in terms of, George, what a possible motion you could have to amend is just to direct the city manager to include an exemption for 4J and Bethel, and then we'll work on the exact language and where to put it, but that would give us the direction to include an exemption for the school districts.
Okay, yes, thank you. And I'm not talking about a total exemption. I mean, I think everyone needs to kind of jump in and this thing and shoulder the burden, but I don't want to see them unduly overburdened. And so I guess I will make a motion. I move to direct the city manager to come back as part of this ordinance with exemption schedules for 4J and partial exemption schedules for 4J and Bethel school districts.
Your second?
I'll second for purpose of discussion.
Now we're discussing this.
George's just,
So I've got one cue that's just from before, but I'm going to go to this cue now. So I've got George and Alan. George.
Me, George, not you,
Yeah,
George.
that's right.
This just flies in the face of what you just said in order to get the fee on the ballot, that you think everybody should pay, and that the university should pay, and all the other people that aren't paying property taxes should have to pay. So why should we start making exemptions for school districts? Let's start adding in the university. Let's start adding in some churches. Let's make some allowances for them. I mean, it's either one or the other. You can't have both. So I can't support the amendment.
Alan?
One thing you might consider is, George, is to, since it's only going to have a 2-tier rate, put 4J in the residential, add it to the residential definition. So they pay $10 instead of whatever the residential, non-residential rate's going to be.
So my question is, if this went through, then each school would pay?
Correct?
Claire?
Yeah, so I guess that's kind of my question, too. It's hard for me to know whether I would support this, partly because I don't know what the burden is on the school district. So, and if it would be $10 or $20 per site, so not having knowledge about what the burden is going to be on them, it's hard for me to decide whether there's wiggle room for unburdening them some. Though I understand the intent of the motion, because we have seen at least one public comment that made the concern about adding to already stressed school district budgets. So I'm not sure I would support the motion either, but I thought it would be worth talking about.
George Brown?
Thanks, ma'am. Well, to compare 4J and Bethel with the University of Oregon is totally inappropriate. One is a profit-making, dynamic economic engine of the whole town that supports activities hundreds, if not thousands of times more than K through 12 districts do. They are in desperate shape. 4J and Bethel. They will probably have, they're debating now whether to put upon a measure of their own just to maintain the quality of the school buildings. So we're going to have a social equity piece of this, and low-income people will be forgiven all, or at least significant portions of their responsibility. And if we don't do this for the schools, I think it's a very bad mistake. I would like to have that option on there, and we don't have to. Well, we're not deciding on the actual schedules today. We just want the language in there so that we can adjust them. And I think it only makes sense to have K through 12 to have some wiggle room here, because they're going to be asking people for money too, and so if we keep adding to their burden, we just help them dig their hole deeper. And it's not total exemption. We've already decided we're going to have a social equity, kind of like a sliding scale, very simple categories. And I'm not suggesting that they not pay anything. I think, I don't know how many times I have to say it, I think that they should contribute too, but I don't think they should bear the full burden, because they simply can't afford it either, just like some individuals can't. Thanks.
Greg?
I kind of concur with you on this, George, simply because I know directly what's happening in the Bethel district, as well as to some degree with 4J, in terms of the operational budgets that they are facing and the crisis that they're facing right now. Particularly when we talk about classroom sizes and we're talking about numbers of available teachers, they're really under the gun, and this is kind of a catch-22 situation, because on the one hand, the city needs the money to maintain critical services. On the other hand, if you talk about quality of life and the and the K-12 education system, that is another significant piece of the quality of life equation for any community, and particularly this community. And in the Bethel School District where I'm at, in the lower grades, and I know this goes throughout the entire system, but when you're looking at a second grade class with 34, 35, 36 kids in it, and one teacher and maybe a teacher's aide, that's is unsustainable, in my opinion. And I think that, George, you're right. We need to do something in terms of adjusting the rate for the school districts, because I know that 4J is going to have probably, I don't know for sure, but probably, from what I see on the ballot measure on, probably a bond measure. And eventually I think that we will see one, if not, all three of the major school districts in this metro area go out for operating levies in the next few years. So I'm, really sensitive to those kinds of issues. And in this case, I just want to have something a little bit more fleshed out, George, in terms of how this would look and how it would work.
Thank you, Mayor. And that was actually why I asked to be recognized. I'm not clear, George. I think I'm clearer now than I was when you made the motion. Originally, I thought you were asking that we put something in here that the council would fill in and say a 50% reduction or a 25% reduction. But it sounds like what you're actually asking for is that the school districts be treated the same as the low-income assistance program, so that the council, at the time that you set the fee and established the low-income program, you would have the ability to say 4J and Bethel get a 1% reduction, a 99% reduction, but you would actually be saying what it is at that point, rather than the ordinance actually saying they get a certain percentage reduction. Is that?
Yes, I think that captures it, Glenn. I don't think we can really decide on the amount, of what every category is going to pay. We can't figure that out tonight. We don't have the information.
Okay, so then if this motion passes, what we would do is draft something that would be similar to the low-income program that says the council at the time you set the fee or before you set the fee could grant to 4J in Bethel a reduction, and you would determine at that time what that amount would be, just like you can do with the low-income program.
Yes, thank you. That's what I had in mind.
Chris?
I appreciate the sentiment because I was on the 4J school board and I know how hard it is to cut, and I know laying off teachers and with the budget that they're looking at it, philosophically I think I really agree that they have been hit hard and whatever accommodation they can receive would be good. My only hesitation though is this is a user fee, and the more we start making it look like a tax, because of its incremental element. I mean, that's what a tax is an incremental charge as opposed to a fee, which primarily is flat. One of the disadvantages of a fee is that it is charged flat. Everybody pays the same amount, and that's what makes it regressive, and I understand that. But when you have a fee, and for all of very legitimate reasons, you don't really want to charge it as something flat, you want to try to make it progressive, you're really pushing it in the direction of taking it from what it is and trying to turn it into something else. And not using the mechanism that is most effectively suited for that. So I would be only willing to consider making some sort of an accommodation for the school district if it was done so clearly and so simply that it couldn't be mistaken as trying to turn it into just a backdoor way of being like a tax, as opposed to a fee. So Alan had mentioned they come in at the residential rate. That's a simple example, but to say we grant 1% and they get the exemption, and at some point later on we might start doing that with other folks, and pretty soon this thing turns into a tax, and then it gets referred because it's supposed to be a fee and we've monkeyed around with it and changed it fundamentally. I worry about that. So I know what you're trying to do, and I agree with what you're trying to do. I just want to make sure that we do that in a thoughtful way. So I may not support it right now, but it doesn't mean we couldn't figure out some way to accommodate it further down the road later on. I don't know what that would be, but I want to keep it simple. I think it needs simplicity is what is going to be the primary advantage for this, and I think we start making it complicated, it's going to really start dooming it.
Alan?
So I'll make a friendly suggestion, George, that we just change the definition from residential, make the residential unit definition to be residential unit and school district. And so school districts pay something, but they don't pay at the same rate as non-residential. It's simple, it's straightforward. It handles all of Chris's issues, and we just have in that residential definition the definition of a school district, which would be fairly simple to do. You could actually name them. We only have two, right?
We would get to the same place. I'd probably do it a little differently in the ordinance, but we would, if that's what the council wanted to do, we could set it up so that the school districts are charged the residential rate.
Or have three different definitions. So they're just charged $10 a month.
You accept that as a friendly charge?
Well, I'd like to yes, I'll accept it, but I'd also like to comment on it. It's basically the same thing that I just proposed, because the residential rate will be capped at $10 a month. That doesn't mean it's going to be $10 a month. That's the high end. Same thing for the schools. And if we can figure out a way to make it and do the least harm to those school districts, so maybe this is, was the intent of this amendment here, or this addition. Actually, it's really an amendment. So I prefer the language in the other one because this one I don't know if it captures exactly. We're saying that the schools would be exactly the same as the residential, and I would prefer to let them have a little wiggle room. But if that's the will of,
Not accepting the friendly.
I'll accept it because it gets closer to what I wanted. I think they definitely need to be differentiated, but. And we're not setting rates tonight.
I still have the floor.
No, go ahead.
That's true.
I don't remember who seconded George's, and is that friendly okay with you?
Yes. All right.
The reason I was suggesting it,
All
since
right,
I still
all
have the floor, is that it's just simple. It's not, I think that going into the low-income program assistance and all that gets complicated and it muddies the waters, and this is already difficult enough for people to get their hands around. This just makes it easy. So it's just, you got residential school districts and non-residential.
Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. Since school districts and no governments of any sort, nor do companies for that matter, actually pay taxes, only residents and customers actually, and real people actually pay the taxes that flow through those organizations. What we're doing is, with this motion, because the school districts are putting measures on the ballot to get more money from people as well, we're asking them to take a little less from people. And so I'll support it because it lessens the tax burden on individuals to do it this way.
Okay, I think we're ready to vote on George's motion. All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. In opposition? 1. It passes. Okay. And Glenn, you're clear on what? All right. So we're back in the queue again. And I've got Greg, Betty, Claire, Alan, and George Brown.
Yeah, so this is to the city manager again. What if eWeb is not the collection mechanism that floats to the surface with this, or decides they say we don't want to do this? What other methods of collection would the city have at its disposal to, bring the revenue in? 1, and 2, with that, what methods are available, if someone is not complying with paying the fee to, deal with that particular issue? That's one question. The second one, while I got the floor, is, again, I'm looking at the cost of administration on the fee, and hopefully if you guys can come back with something Wednesday that gives me a ballpark figure of what that looks like. I really kind of want to wrap my head around the cost of administering the fee and what that entails and how that would be incorporated into the structure of the fee.
I can answer, and Sue, if you want to weigh in, please feel free to. Probably in a couple pieces. One is, if eWeb does not collect the fee for whatever reason, because from their perspective or our perspective, a couple other options. We would either seek out somebody else, another agencies that could collect the fee, and I don't know specifically who that is at the moment, or we can choose to do that ourselves. We've done some work, but we haven't spent lots and lots of time on it, because what we didn't want to do is spend dozens and scores of staff time on something that wasn't actually going to go forward. And so we probably have a little bit of information, but not probably enough that'll be satisfying for you on Wednesday. What we will be doing, though, from here going forward, is we will engage in a much more robust conversation about how all that will be collected and administered, and then we will be able to talk much better about options as we go forward.
All right, next, Betty.
Well, I'm concerned about how we decide whether someone's low income or not. I know many people are having trouble paying their eWeb bills already, and I hear people saying that they're scared every time they open the bill. And I'm concerned about the collection methods. Some of the enforcing methods are listed in this ordinance, like discontinuing sewer service.
I think what this actually says is,
if the city manager implements it, and it's party's delinquent, city manager may take any and all lawful steps to collect the delinquent amounts, including but not limited to disconnecting sewer service and instituting judicial proceedings to collect the amounts owing.
and what we're trying to do in this section is wanting to ensure that we collect it in the most efficient and cost-effective way as possible we don't know what that is going to be yet, and so we're trying to at least maintain some sense of flexibility. So when we get to that point, it doesn't say we will necessarily do something like that.
I know, but it's people who can't pay it, then once you disconnect something or once you take action, they're even less able to pay it.
And what I would say is, in a previous position, having had utility billing and utilities under my purview, by the time you get to disconnecting anything, you're way down the road in that. That is, in my experience, never a good idea to pursue that as a first course of remedy. And so even if that were something that were under our purview, that would not be sort of first out the gate, because we do recognize that people are in a whole lot of different types of financial situations, and so there's often a lot of work at trying to keep people within their utilities connected.
Well, I met a woman who told me she'd had to use a bucket for some months and empty it in the backyard because that's in Eugene. I assume she was breaking the law, but she didn't have a choice.
Claire?
I was.
Oh.
I'm just. So how are you going to determine if somebody's low income?
The city council, at the time that you would adopt the low-income assistance program, you would be the ones to define it. So the ordinance doesn't say doesn't provide a definition of low income. The council gets to do that when you create that low-income assistance program.
So could it be everybody below $50,000 a year?
Yes, there's nothing in the ordinance that says how you define it.
And then how would we get enough money? That's. Yeah. Okay, thanks. That's all.
Claire?
So I have a question in terms of the details in the ordinance or what's on the ballot. Is the plan to include dollar amounts next to these categories of services so people can kind of see proportionally how things are being funded, or did you have some thoughts around that?
What we do know would be in the resolution would be that list of that 5.3. I don't know if we.
The draft of the resolution doesn't have dollar amounts next to each of the items. It has the total of 5.3.
So without that specificity, would that allow us to move pots of money around between these categories? Because I would like it to be, the amount of HSC funding that's on the line, the Looking Glass funding that's on the line, what the cost of the branch libraries are. Because otherwise it makes me concerned that then we could say, HSC, we can take some of that money and make sure to, keep our police investigators. If we
Let me see if this is helpful. If it's
renegotiate
not
the
helpful,
contract with the EPD and now, they've got a salary raise.
let me see if this is helpful. If it's not, then we can keep working on it, because if the fee were passed by the voters, what you would see in my budget for FY14 will be what is currently being funded. And so we're currently funding HSC discretionary at, $853,000 or whatever it is, right? Dollars. So that's what you would expect to see in the budget, as an example.
Okay, that is helpful.
Yeah.
Alan?
So following up on that, the section 2.2102 says paying for fire, police, homeless, human services, quality life services such as libraries and pools. So how would the city manager know, if it fails, how would you know exactly what to not include?
It would be that same $5.3 million list, because that list will be a part of the resolution, and part of that will be that if it passes, it'll be in my budget. If it's not, it won't be in my budget. So it's that same $5.3 million list.
Right, and that list is slide 6. So my concern about that is that, so we've thrown out this list that was attachment A that has the $7 million on it, which isn't exactly the same as this. So I think my concern here is that it's not specific enough, that there's people don't know exactly what they're buying. and it doesn't say we're buying 2 Cahoots vans and it costs $360,000. I think we actually need that kind of specificity. And I appreciate trying to get some flexibility in here, but I think that that's not where we should go with this. I think that this needs to be as transparent as possible. It needs to be a specific list of things that won't be included so people know what they're buying or what they're foregoing if they vote no.
And this is the list right on the screen. So I'm not sure what other specificity it is.
Well, dollars.
If you say yes, you're buying the fire company a Station 2 and a second Cahoots van. And if we can put some dollars in there. What I don't want to do is get hung up on if we say the second Cahoots van is $300,000 and it turns out to be $301,000 or $299,999, that somebody starts talking about where's the other dollar going. And so that's the issue here for me. This is the services that you're going to be provided, that we're maintaining the level of services that we have right now. And so if there's a more specificity that helps with that, but this is the list that's either in my budget or not in the budget. And it's the service level that you're experiencing right now around these things.
Yeah, I appreciate you not wanting to get wrapped around the axle about a dollar here, a dollar there. Maybe we can come up with some language that these are the approximate levels of budget or funding for these particular services, and here's the list, and here's how much they cost. And I think that's something place we need to go. I'll have to think about that some more. On the low income, I think one of the ways to identify who the low income folks are is we could identify those people. There is already a list of people that are on food stamps that are low income people, and that list can be dealt with confidentially. It's easy to identify people, and it's a much larger pool than the folks that are getting the low income bill payment assistance, for instance, with eWeb. So I think that's actually a pretty easy way when we get to that mechanism to figure out how to do that. The last thing is related to the service fee amount, and I would like to move to change section 2.2015 subsection 3 that stipulates a $10 for residential and $20 for non-residential, and increase the non-residential to $30 a month.
There is second.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Further conversation?
One of the things that this does is when you have that larger differential, it lowers the residential rate by having that. So at $30 a month, that's $360 a year. I think not all businesses, but most businesses can probably afford that, especially if they're very large businesses. We're not making any distinction here between we're just saying residential and everybody else. Well, residential school district and everybody else. So that includes everybody else.
Don't see anybody else in the queue on that one. So all those in favor? Yes?
I would actually support this because I know lots of business people. They're mostly small business people. And yet, I haven't taken a poll of this amount, but I believe that most of them would support this because it's like less than $1 a day. And to maintain the quality of life that we seek to maintain by putting this fee proposal to the voters in the first place, I believe that most of the people that I know, my friends in the business community, would support this. So I will support this. And by the way, we need to remember, it's not a straight flat $30 a month. That is the maximum. It just gives us a little more flexibility to decide what the final level would be.
Mike?
Glenn, under this ordinance, under which category does a home-based business fall?
Good question.
Well, I thought it was defined in here. I'm just trying to...
We have a commercial break here or something?
It's not defined here, so it would fall under residential unit the way this is, the way we currently define residential unit. As long as the home-based business is actually a home and is being used as a residential dwelling unit, the fact that it also has a home-based business in it, it would still fall under residential unit.
Okay, thank you.
Like a daycare center. Your home.
In your home.
If you were
If
providing
it's
daycare.
if it's your home and you
Yeah.
are, you have a couple people who come over, but the key would be, is it being used as a home?
Primarily as a residential
Right.
unit.
Okay, so we're going to vote on this, and then I have 4 people in the queue. We're at 5 minutes to 7, so that's going to be it, unless there's something else we need to do. City Manager?
But I was going to say, Mayor, if it helps with the estimates, we'd be happy to put estimates on that table, and we will indicate that they are estimates,
Okay.
approximate estimates, and that would be fine.
Can we quick restate?
You want to
It's Alan's motion.
it's Alan's,
Oh, just basically changing
20 to 30.
20 to 30 for non-residential.
Okay. All those in favor, please indicate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In opposition, 1, 2, 3. It passes. Okay, I have George Brown, George Poling, Chris, and Greg in the queue, and then we're going to wrap up our work session. George Brown.
Thanks, Mayor. Well, I do support Councilor Zelenka's idea of putting some dollar figures here because, once again, I've read it several times. I read it one more time, the Anros poll. And voters, well, first of all, most of the respondents said that they would support a fee. And then they also said we have to be able to vote on it. So we're kind of working our way up towards the finish line here. Another thing they said was they wanted to see some specificity. They wanted to know where this money was going to go. They supported 3 broad categories. Self-named, self-identified. They weren't given a list to pick from. They were asked to, on their own, just think of the 3 most important things to you. And so they did that, and all of these things fall in those categories. So, and they also said that they were willing to grant the city council a moderately wide leeway. They wanted to know that most of those dollars would go exactly to those programs, but they also realized that you kind of have to, you play the hand you're dealt throughout the year, and sometimes you have to switch them around, and they were willing to let the council have a fair amount of leeway in how they were actually allocated, but they did want to see, a reasonably specific dollar amounts for the services that they were going to be paying for. So I think that it would really be helpful and certainly go a long ways towards ensuring the success of the measure to have some dollar amounts there. Thanks.
George Poling?
Well, I'd like to see another category in the similar to the school districts. We have a large number of nonprofit organizations in this community. Excuse me, in this community that do a lot of good for social services and helping people out, that they themselves are hurting because the donations aren't coming in that they depend upon. So I would move that we add another category to include nonprofit organizations that deal with social services and qualify for 501c3s.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Further discussion? Yes, George.
I won't support this. A lot of these agencies that Councilor Poling just referred to are actually receiving funds through the Human Service Commission funding, and the amount that they would pay, it would be no more than $120 a year. I think that, they can probably find that in their budget. If it was thousands of dollars a year, I might support that, but in reality, it's going to be a pretty small amount, and I think pretty much everybody can handle it, especially because a lot of them are going to be receiving funding from the successful passage of this service fee, so I won't support that amendment.
City Manager.
Just to clarify, George, on your motion, is it intended that all 501c3s, or is it just a certain class of 501c3s that relate to social services?
That's what I'm getting at, is one that deal with providing services for the public, such, the social services, the nonprofits. And I don't want to limit it to, but, things like Goodwill, St. Vinny's, that type of organization that do qualify and have a 501c3 rating.
And so if this is a part of this, then what we would do is, as you're actually getting ready to set the fee, part of that would be defining which those are specifically. So we wouldn't try to define those other than 501c3 social service providers, which then eventually you'll have to define more specifically in that, right?
That could be done.
Mike?
I bet you if we stayed at this long enough, I don't mean anything badly towards my good friend George, but I bet if we stayed at this long enough, we could find a number of other categories that are deserving, certainly, of support. But each and every single one of them, unless it's a pass-through dollar of public money in a public organization, is simply adding more and more money as a higher share paid for by individual people and taxpayers. And it's a bad idea from the start.
All those in favor, please indicate. 2 in opposition. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It does not pass. Chris, you're up.
Thank you. The only distinction I wanted to make is we're talking about ongoing money. The whole point of this is to provide ongoing money. So I think it's important for us to make sure that as we talk about the list of what's in and what's out, and this is kind of what Alan was getting at, is we need to be as specific as we can. I think in addition to being specific about what is being funded, is also specific that this is to relieve ongoing financing. We're not trying to figure out ways to pay for a little one-time stuff. Right. And so I think it'll be very important for us to say what was chosen to be in here was chosen not only because it's important, but also because it's reflective of the need to underwrite ongoing costs for things, so that people don't think that we just create a list of one-time stuff and then next year we'll have a different list. This will be the list. There won't be some different list later on.
Greg, we're the last one.
I'll pass.
So we are done until our
Creating goodwill.